Hey there, my wedding planning friends, and welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time here, thank you so much for clicking on my video. I'm Emily Summer. I'm a wedding planner based in Montana, and I make weekly videos on wedding planning tips and advice. So today's video actually came at a request, and I can't believe I haven't really done a version of this before. I know that I've spoken to just when things go wrong at weddings in general, but I've never really shared my experiences and what I have done specifically when things have gone wrong at weddings. So today we're just gonna chat about like how to pivot, what to do when things are not going according to plan at your wedding. So maybe you're a wedding planner or future wedding planner watching this and wanting to know how to kind of pivot and think fast on your feet when things are not going according to plan at a wedding. Or maybe you are a bride or groom currently planning a wedding and wanting to know how to be prepared if you're not planning on having a wedding planner or wedding coordinator. Or maybe this will convince you to just bite the bullet and have that wedding coordinator on your wedding day. So I've been working weddings for over 10 years and I have seen quite a lot in the way of things going wrong or just not going quite according to plan. That is very normal, and I see it less and less now as I feel like I'm able to spot things that might go wrong before they're happening. But in the very beginning of my career, there was a lot of oversight on my part and just not really knowing what to look for in potential mishaps for weddings. So I have a lot of stories from the early days, but also things that have happened fairly recently, and I'll probably do multiple parts of this because I feel like I could just chat all day about how to prepare for mishaps at weddings. But let's just dive in and I will share some stories with you. So one of the first ones that comes to mind was very early in my career. I had a wedding that I was actually double booked on this day. So there was a time where I was working towards having other planners working under me to kind of work their own wedding so that we would each be working a wedding on the same day. And I realized I'm just too much of a control freak for that, and this particular wedding definitely solidified that for me as well. However, I had a staff member working a wedding and I was working a separate wedding, so I was not actually on site for this wedding. However, that coordinator that I had working that wedding calls me about 3 hours before the ceremony is supposed to start, saying that the florist has not arrived yet. We had a timeline, we had a specific time that the florist was supposed to be there, and she did the right thing and, reached out and contacted and realized, hey, they're supposed to be here by now, and they're not. I was able to get a hold of the florist. Turns out they had the wrong date written down on their calendar. They had the wedding date for the following weekend, so they did not have any of the floral arrangements prepared. Luckily, this was barely enough time for them to be contacted and throw some arrangements together. It was not exactly what the bride asked for, and so that was definitely a really disappointing result, something that could have been avoided by me reaching out and confirming with the florist beforehand or making sure that the couple had. In the very beginning of my career, I wasn't as involved in the process as I am now, and even as just a day of coordinator, I will touch base with every single wedding vendor, whether that's really my responsibility or in my contract or not, just so that we are all on the same page, and it saves my butt, honestly, and just to make sure that, again, the same information is being relayed from both the bride and the groom as well as myself, and that they're not getting misinformation, and just making sure that everyone is working together off of the same timeline and the same information. So that is my biggest piece of advice, is just making sure that you are creating that timeline for the wedding day and making sure that every single vendor is on board and using the same information, the same timeline, and everyone's on the same page. That was definitely something that could have been avoided by my own actions, whereas a lot of these are things that just happen on the day of, but you live and you learn, right? A recent mishap that I had was the caterers not only arrived late, but were also running late. So same thing, when this goes for any vendor that's running late, that's why you have that timeline so you know when they're supposed to arrive, so that when they are late, it's 15, 20 minutes, probably not that big of a deal. If it's 45 minutes, an hour past when they're scheduled to arrive, that's when you're wanting to make those calls and make sure that not only that they have the date correct, but that they are not lost, that they don't have the timing wrong, that something crazy didn't happen, that their car broke down or whatever it might be, to ensure that they're going to arrive on time and that everything is going to run smoothly for you. So I had caterers. This was my first time working with these caterers, so I didn't really know what to expect. They arrived a little bit late. They were a little late setting up, but typically if that happens, it's not that big of a deal in the grand scheme of the overall wedding timeline. However, when it came time for cocktail hour, moving into our scheduled dinner time, I went to check in on an ETA and making sure we were still on time. The time allotted for the cocktail hour photos went a lot quicker than originally scheduled, so the couple had more time to mingle during their cocktail hour, and so we were getting to a point where we could start dinner a little bit early if the caterers were ready, so that there wasn't a lot of lag time in between. So I go in, check on the caterers, and not only are they not prepared to have dinner a little early, which is totally fine, but they're actually running behind. And I'm having a hard time getting an actual ETA on when the caterers will be ready, but I keep getting this like 15-20 minute estimation, right? So 15-20 minutes, not a big deal. We'll just keep people happy. We'll keep them at the bar. And it's a beautiful evening, so everyone's just enjoying the outdoor space. 15-20 minutes rolls around and I say, hey, we're getting to that point, like, can I get guests seated for dinner? Because I don't want to make the announcement for guests to go sit down when they're still going to be a long time. So if I don't want to still use that same timing of, okay, get guests seated at 5:45 for an originally scheduled 6 p.m. dinner if dinner's not going to be served till 6:30, because I feel like it's worse for guests to be sitting at a table and waiting for dinner than for them to just be mingling and standing around. So I'm waiting to make that announcement, and I go check on the caterers again, and still I'm not being able to get a solid confirmation on what the timing is. And then I check in on them and they tell me it's going to be 30 minutes, and I straight up say no. Like, that's going to put us about an hour late for dinner, which again is going to just push everything else later. And that's not that big of a deal, except for when you account for the vendor times that you were trying to plan for. So the photographers specifically, you only have them contracted for a certain number of hours. So if their end time is at 8:30 p.m. and you have all of these things to accomplish before then, pushing dinner back an hour is really going to compromise that timing. So I'm saying, hey, let's do whatever we can to make that happen sooner. So they're rushing. They're saying, okay, we'll do it sooner. Let's get people seated. 20 minutes rolls around. You guessed it, still not ready. So we still chose to make that announcement because we're hoping that they're going to be ready quickly. We make the announcement saying that, dinner is running behind. So when things like that happen, open communication is great. At this point, guests are also going to start looking at you funny, like, what the heck is going on? We're waiting around. This feels like a long time to have to wait. So just make sure that you are communicating with your couple if you are a wedding planner, and let them know what's going on at this point. I always try and wait until absolutely necessary to communicate when things go wrong to the couple, just because they're probably going to take it at a higher emotional and stress level than you will. And so it's kind of a job as a coordinator is to absorb that stress for the couple. So I usually wait until I absolutely have to relay something before I relay something to the couple. So I let them know that we're running a little bit behind on dinner, and I have the DJ make an announcement that guests can get comfy in their seats, mingle around, grab another drink, and we'll have dinner ready as soon as possible, so that they at least know what's going on as well. Now, in hindsight, had I known that the catering dinner wasn't going to be ready for almost an hour past the scheduled time at the start, I would have had the bartender start pouring champagne and would have done toasts before dinner. That way, not only are we saving time in the end, but we are also kind of filling that dead space where guests are like, what the heck is going on? Waiting for the next thing to happen. So in hindsight, if you upfront get an estimation from the caterers that they are 30 minutes or more behind, it's a good idea to do those toasts before dinner so that you're saving time in the end. However, I kept giving the 15-minute, 20-minute extension 3 times that it was hard to kind of predict that. But if you're ever in a situation where you know it's going to be 30 minutes or more that you're behind for dinner, maybe think about communicating about doing toasts early, or maybe their first dance early, or just something to kind of fill that space and then make up time in the end. Here in Montana, I feel like the majority of my mishaps or things that go awry are weather related, and that really goes for anywhere that you're having a wedding outdoors. Weather can always be a factor. I could go on for days about stories about this, but essentially, always having a plan B is something that you must have if you're having an outdoor wedding. And that goes for any time of the year. Just always have a backup option. If it's either scorchingly hot and there's no shade, or if it's storming and raining or lightning or something like that, have a plan B so that you can quickly pivot and either move guests inside for a ceremony or move guests inside for dancing, dinner, whatever that's going to be. Have that plan B ready before the wedding day so that you can make that quick switch. This is also when having an extra hand, an extra person comes in handy. I try and always travel with at least one assistant for my weddings, at least through like the ceremony and cocktail hour. I don't have to necessarily have them the whole time, or if you are working, trying to find somebody to work with you, you don't necessarily have to have them work with you the entire duration of start to finish that you are contracted, but just having someone there for kind of the change going into the ceremony, going into cocktail hour, and going into reception, in case there's anything that needs to be moved around. I have experienced this so many times, and it just goes a lot smoother when you have multiple hands being able to make this pivot and change. So overall, before I go into a part 2 of more specific stories, my best advice for being able to prepare for and kind of adapt and be flexible when it comes to mishaps during a wedding is, like I mentioned before, always have a timeline. Have a scheduled timeline from the very first thing that's happening that day to the very last thing that's happening that day. This will keep not only you on track, but everyone else involved, so that every vendor is getting the same timeline, the same information, and everyone is working together on the same page. This will also make it glaringly obvious when things are running behind, if a vendor's not arriving on time, so that you can be on top of it and make sure that things are going to go according to plan. I also highly recommend reaching out and introducing yourself to every vendor that you are working with if you have not worked with them before. That way you're establishing that mode of communication that not only if they need something they can reach out to you, but also for you as well. So if you need something in the wedding process or on the wedding day, you already have that open line of communication, and ultimately the vendor team on a wedding day, you're just that, you're a team. You are all working together towards a common goal, and so you should be working together so that if anything happens, you're all working towards the same goal of wanting to have a flawless wedding. Finally, when things are not going according to plan, I always recommend you want to process, collaborate, and execute without involving the couple whenever possible. So unless it's something that will drastically change the couple's vision or something that they really liked or one of their priorities, if that's going to be affected, then yes, communicate with them to make sure that you are both coming up with a solution that's going to make everyone happy. When it's these small, minor things that can easily be adjusted or fixed without involving them, that is the whole point of your job. You know, you're trying to adapt and make things happen behind the scenes so that they can just enjoy their day and try and come up with solutions before ever needing to involve them. I've got plenty more where this came from, so I'm sure stay tuned for part 2 where I'll share some more mishaps I've experienced at weddings. Hopefully you found this video helpful. If you did, please like and subscribe to get weekly videos on wedding planning tips and advice, and we'll see you next week.